Today, we're diving into the incredible, almost unbelievable story of Marie and Pierre Curie. This wasn't just any scientific partnership. No, their work didn't just discover a few new things. It literally paved the way for the entire atomic age. And this quote, it just nails it. Their journey was pure drama, not just because of the mind-blowing results, but because of the unbelievable difficulties they had to fight through. It's a story of pure grit and perseverance that ended up changing the world. All right, so our first section, a formidable mind. Because this whole scientific revolution, it really begins with one person, a determined young woman from Poland named Marie Skłodowska, who just refused to let anything get in the way of her education. Her early life was just this whirlwind. She was born in Warsaw back in 1867, but the real turning point came in 1891. She moves to Paris, chasing the university education that was forbidden for women back home, and then, just a few years later, bam, she meets Pierre, and one of history's greatest partnerships was born. You know, it's hard to even wrap your head around the challenges she faced. College was totally off limits for women in Poland. So in Paris, she was so poor she was literally sleeping in unheated attics. At times, she had so little food, she would just faint in the middle of class. And yet through all of that, she still graduated first in her class. Just incredible. And then there was Pierre. Now, he wasn't just a supportive husband. He was a brilliant scientist himself. He had already discovered something called piezoelectricity, which in simple terms is a way to use crystals to measure teeny-tiny electrical currents. And that tool, it would turn out to be absolutely crucial for the work they were about to do. This was a true partnership of minds. And this powerhouse partnership was about to run into the biggest mystery of their careers, a puzzle that was hidden inside this dark, kind of boring-looking rock called pitchblende. So what was the secret locked inside this rock? Well, it was a brand new idea at the time, radioactivity. A scientist named Henri Becquerel had just found that uranium spontaneously gave off these strange, powerful rays. The Curies were absolutely fascinated and knew they had to figure out what was going on. And this is where things get really weird. It's 1898, and they're testing all sorts of materials. And they find this one chunk of pitchblende that is way, way more radioactive than the amount of uranium in it could possibly explain. It just didn't make any sense. It defied all the known science. So how could that be? This led the Curies to make this incredible, brilliant leap. Their conclusion was that there must be something else in that ore. New, undiscovered elements that were present in tiny amounts but were massively more radioactive than uranium. I mean, what an incredibly bold idea, and it set them off on their historic quest. Now, you're probably picturing some fancy, state-of-the-art lab for this quest, right? Well, think again. Their world-changing work took place over 4 long, grueling years in a rundown shed. I mean, just look at these conditions. Calling it a laboratory is being generous. It was basically a shack. The roof leaked when it rained, it was freezing cold in the winter, and they had none of the proper equipment you'd expect. The difference between where they worked and the brilliant science they were doing is just staggering. Okay, to really understand the scale of their task, let's just look at some numbers. It started with this, 1 ton. That's right, a ton of pitchblende waste they got from a mine. And they had to pay for the shipping themselves, which took pretty much all the money they had. And with that 1 ton of rock, they started 4 years of nonstop, backbreaking physical work. We're talking boiling, dissolving, stirring huge vats of this stuff, day in and day out, for 4 years. And after all that time, after a ton of rock and 4 years of work, what did they have to show for it? This, 1/300th of an ounce. A tiny little pinch of pure white powder that they had painstakingly pulled out of that original ton of ore. The sheer difficulty is just, it's almost unimaginable. But oh man, what was in that tiny pinch of powder? That was the prize. That was the holy grail they had been hunting for. Not just one, but 2 totally new elements. So how on earth did they do it? Well, their method was basically a process of elimination. They were chasing the radioactivity. They dissolved the ore, used chemicals to separate it into different parts, or fractions. Then they'd use their special electrometer to test which fraction was the most radioactive. They'd throw out the rest and do it again, and again, and again, getting closer to the source each time. And you know what? It worked. Big time. In July of 1898, they found a substance that was 400 times more radioactive than uranium. Marie named it polonium to honor her home country. But they knew there was something else in there, something even more powerful. And by December, they found it, radium, an element so radioactive it was almost unbelievable. And this was their reward. Can you just imagine? After 4 years of brutal work in that cold, leaky shed, they could finally see the results. That tiny bit of radium they isolated was so powerful that the glass vial it was in would literally glow in the dark. It must have felt like pure magic. That magical glow of radium lit up the entire scientific world. But, it also cast a very long shadow. Their discovery came with an incredible legacy, but also a terrible, terrible personal cost. Of course, the world had to take notice. In 1903, they shared the Nobel Prize in Physics. Then, after Pierre's tragic death, Marie went on to win the 1911 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, all by herself. That made her one of the very few people in history, to this day, to win a Nobel in 2 different scientific fields. But then, tragedy strikes. In 1906, Pierre dies in a sudden, awful accident. But Marie, she carried on their work alone. She took over his professorship, becoming the first woman professor in the history of the Sorbonne. She kept working right up until her death in 1934, and their legacy was cemented forever when element 96 was named curium in their honor. But this is the heartbreaking part of the story, the ultimate cost. They were pioneers in a field where nobody understood the dangers. Marie's death from leukemia was almost certainly caused by her decades of handling the very elements she discovered. In the end, she gave her life for her work. And that leaves us with this final, powerful question. The Curie story is one of pure genius, for sure, but it's also one of immense sacrifice. It really makes you wonder, what is that incredible force in us, that drive to chase after knowledge no matter what obstacles are in the way, even when the personal cost is everything?